Buonasera, benvenuti a tutti. Welcome. Of course, today the live is going to be in English. I've already warned everyone. And welcome back, Johan Christian Sollid. You've already been our guests in the past. And of course, if Johan is here, it's because we're going to talk about Denmark. There have been some news about Denmark in the past couple of months. So we are going to discuss those because they are fairly big news. And and definitely we want to get more insight on them. So first of all, welcome, Johan. And can you please introduce yourself for our public?
Thank you so much for the invitation once again, Luca. Yes, my name is, as you said, Johan Christian Sollid. I am a nuclear advocate from Denmark, but I professionally also work in the nuclear developing and electricity company Stjernfuld Energy. It's a Swedish/Danish energy company. And I have been in the nuclear space for around 5 to 6 years. I started the organization Nuclear Power Yes Please in Denmark, Atomkraft Ja Tak, 5 years ago. And I'm still the sitting chairman, and we are a 100% volunteer-based organization gathering young people from universities and all the way down to elementary school to do volunteer-based activism surrounding nuclear energy. And the last couple of years, I've also worked as an advisor for different politicians and companies around Denmark on their stance on nuclear energy and how they can enter the debate about nuclear energy in a sane manner without getting backlash from the public or their opposition. So it's a lot about communications. And lastly, I have a background in political science, and that's also what sparked my interest in nuclear when I went to university a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Your work is definitely paying off because there have been sizable changes in the public opinion in Denmark on nuclear power. We will talk about that later. But first of all, I want to start with the very big news. Last time you came here, we discussed the fact that some Danish companies, Danish companies building offshore wind farms, were having a crisis. I mean, Vestas, Ørsted, and Siemens Energy, all of them had huge losses in 2024, and also lately. I think GE Vernova also scrapped their. They're not scrapped. They laid off some people in the offshore wind department, and Denmark, of course, was poised to be a country to invest a lot on offshore wind energy. They invested a lot. You build a lot of wind farms, but the last auction to build even more wind farms, that was, I believe, in November or December, nobody showed up. Like basically, because the government didn't promise any subsidies, or you will tell us now better. But I think that the government promised no subsidies for these upcoming projects, and because there was a lack of subsidies, nobody showed up for this auction. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and it's a good sum up. As you said, last time I was here, we were talking about the possibility of these companies, as you mentioned, if they would end up actually building these projects in Denmark specifically. And what we've seen the last year in Denmark, it started off in May last year, where a Danish consultancy released a report actually sponsored by the wind industry, trying to make a sense of the numbers of investment and the profitability of investing in offshore wind. And that showed there was a great loss. You will actually have a negative impact in the whole life cycle of the offshore wind farm on your investment.
Negative impact, we are talking about
economically negative impact. So it would be a very bad investment and this is without subsidies. Of course, this is on a free market. That's where they simulated market prices and capture prices of wind, because most of the times, a lot of these projects is presented with the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, But the problem is that, of course, wind and offshore wind in particular has a lower capture rate of the spot price.
Obviously I know what capture rate is, but my public may not. So I would like to ask you if you can explain exactly the concept of capture rate.
The concept of capture rate is that we all know of an electricity price in the Nordic region. It's called the North Pool, which is the day-ahead price of electricity. It varies from hour to hour, and different energy sources produce at different times. Mostly weather-dependent energy sources produce at the same time, so it pushes the price down. So in overall terms, they will have a lower price through the in the day. They will not have the daily average of the spot price. They will have a lower price because they produce at the same times where the price is low, and when the price is high, it's mostly fossil energy sources and baseload, just baseload energy sources, also nuclear and hydro, that captures those prices. So you'll see that hydro and nuclear and markets, their price is the same as the spot price. It's a 100% capture rate, and maybe a little bit above that. But wind and solar, especially solar, has a much lower capture price. So they get less money for the electricity they produce into the market. And this was put into these offers and calculated for the first time in a public consultancy in Denmark, showing that this was a very bad investment. So there started coming rumors out that the investment case for these projects would not be sufficient, because Denmark, this tender in Denmark, this wind tender of 6 gigawatts, it was a tender where you would not get any CFDs, contract for difference. So you'll not get a fixed price for the electricity that you produce for at least 20 years, for example. It will be on solely market terms. So the wind farms should produce the power that they sell into the market. They will not get a fixed price. They will just get the market price. And I think that everyone at this point in the market understands that this is not possible. Neither it is for nuclear, it is for all energy sources at this point, when you have had so much integration of solar power in Europe, that there are times of the day where the price is negative or zero. So if you need a investment in large energy source infrastructure projects, as a offshore wind farm or a nuclear power plant, you'll need some security. And all the other tenders that have been, for example, in the UK or in the Netherlands and so on, they are with fixed prices, but the one in Denmark was not. And this, of course, a lot of us, not only me, but some other people in the Danish, not community, but energy community, saw this as a big hurdle for this offer. But the Danish politicians and the government kept on saying that, oh, it's no problem, we'll get these farms built. We can actually earn money. The state can earn money on private investors coming in and building offshore. And the problem was that the way that the tender was created, it was created on the basis of a wind farm in Denmark called Thor. And that is the German utility called RWE that actually paid the Danish state to get this park built, 1 or 2 gigawatt offshore wind park. And on this one example, the Danish state said that all offshore in the future shall not be state subsidized. And they have said this for years. That has been the whole idea of subsidizing wind in Denmark, so much that at some point it can be on market terms. But as we all know, if you subsidize something that cannot survive on market terms, it will never be able to stand on its own. And that's the negative feedback loop of this, is that offshore wind will never, in a European market, survive on market terms, period. So
I will actually add something. I spoke about the GE Vernova layoff of people, like half the people in the offshore wind department. One of the directors of the department basically openly stated that this business doesn't make sense. Offshore wind has the same LCOE of nuclear, but with the intermittency of renewables. So because it's building wind turbines on land, it's fairly easy, but building them on sea is way more expensive. Even just renting the building ship, because you need a specific ship that to build these things in the middle of the sea, and then you need to anchor them to the seabed.
seabed.
And yeah, it's very expensive, it's very complicated. The engineering itself is very complicated, and the only way you can actually make it make sense is to build the bigger and bigger turbines, so that for each turbine you can generate more and more energy. There are like massive projects of turbines of 25 megawatts, which are like crazy big. We are talking like 350 meters tall.
Yeah.
And but there aren't even ships to build those. They're like making projects counting on the fact that someone will build a ship able to assemble those things, because there is none at the moment. The best you can do is like 15 megawatts to
the thing about that is it's totally correct, and that is what you're talking about is also a more global perspective on offshore wind, because offshore wind in most part of the world is fairly hard to build, as there is a deep sea and not a stable seabed. But in Denmark, we actually have very shallow sea close to the shore, and we have a very stable seabed. So we are the most likely case for this to succeed. Denmark has the best best surroundings and opportunities to build offshore wind, and not even with the best set of starters and conditions, we're not able to do it on a market terms. But it's not as simple as this, because in Denmark, we have a lot of other projects depending on the offshore wind parks, and we will get to that later, as you said at the start, with the energy islands. But this is a whole domino effect that have happened in Denmark, and the story goes back to hydrogen in any sense. And Denmark has been one of the countries that has tried to pioneer producing green hydrogen from renewables. And this has all been gathered around, and this is true. It sounds ridiculous, but building a very long hydrogen pipeline straight down the country from the northern part of the country, connecting it to the shore where you could get electricity produced from offshore wind with electrolyzers, and then send the hydrogen down through Denmark to Germany, to their infrastructure. So this was the whole case for building this much offshore wind. We saw back a couple of years ago, we saw the Danish prime minister back then, the German prime minister, the Belgian, and from the Netherlands and from the UK gathered in Denmark to say, we can build 150 gigawatts of offshore wind in North Sea. Everyone clapped, and it was so amazing, and it was a perfect way of building offshore wind. The problem was that this all depended on getting an offtake of 150 gigawatts installed capacity of offshore, and this was with hydrogen. But as we have seen in Denmark, the country where you have had the most ambitious plans to build hydrogen, with the state-owned company Ørsted, which also is the leader of offshore wind production in the world, have had 9 to 10 out of 11 projects with hydrogen, Power-to-X, not only hydrogen, but also ammonia and so on, cancelled the last year. So everything is falling from each other. So when the hydrogen pipeline doesn't make any sense more, the projects producing the electrolyzers is not even economical feasible. The state don't want to build the pipeline because we don't have any offtake in Germany, we don't have any production. Then everything falls apart. And the last bit is about energy islands, and we will come to that later, because the energy islands should be financed with a tariff on building offshore wind from this tender. And as the tender didn't make it, there will be no payment of these tariffs to build the energy islands, and then the energy islands will not be built. And then the whole idea of 100% renewable energy system, all the system planning, all of the energy system models that have been proposed to make this system happen falls apart. So all the assumptions has been proven wrong already. So now we are at a very, very special brink in time, where we see the reality of how our energy system has been planned and how it has failed. And that's why also we will come to later why nuclear energy will have a very interesting role in Denmark and in the neighboring countries in Northern Europe.
So yeah, first of all, I was showing right now project status for renewable hydrogen projects in the world, which is, a pretty harsh. I don't know. In Italian, we have the expression a reality bath. I think in English, a reality check is. So this is a reality check on hydrogen. We have we have planned 120 gigawatts of hydrogen by 2030. And right now we have 0.2 in the European Union. And we expect to build 195 years. This is obviously crazy. This is not happening, and this is a big lie that has been sold to us. I will add something. There have been reports lately on hydrogen. I already wrote about this on my socials. Renewable hydrogen, levelized cost of renewable hydrogen is currently 13 times higher than hydrogen produced with methane. Even if you subsidize it heavily, even if you subsidize the electricity part, there is not a chance that you will ever be competitive with this hydrogen. And that means that even if you produce it, companies won't buy it, won't use this hydrogen to abate their emissions, because it's so much, they wouldn't be able to compete with producers in India and China who just use fossil fuels.
Exactly.
Even if you produce hydrogen with nuclear electricity, it's the only way will be with high temperature nuclear reactors that will produce hydrogen directly from heat. And then, of course, the cost is much lower because it's proportional to the thermal output of the reactor, and not the electrical one, which is like 30% of the former. So hydrogen is a very big lie, and there is a reason why we're investing so much on it, because gas lobbyists have been spending crazy amounts of money in the European Commission to promote hydrogen. They spend, like, nuclear lobbying is about like 5 million per year in Brussels. Gas lobbying is about 25 million per year. Hydrogen lobbying is about 60 million per year. So it's like they spend crazy to promote hydrogen because they know it will never work. And once it doesn't work, it will be just business as usual, which means fossil fuels.
Exactly.
And so before we move on to what you said, like the energy islands, first of all, I would like to ask you about reactions. I mean, where this tender was deserted, nobody showed up. How did politicians react in Denmark?
I would say one of the most ironic and tragic things at the same time was seeing the climate minister of Denmark, Lars Aagaard, a former lobbyist, green lobbyist in Denmark. He was interviewed the day after the tender was announced. There was no bidding, and it looked like that he was near shedding a tear, because this man has been put in the front of promoting this idea for now 2 years, where everyone have seen that it is not possible. The industry has said it is not possible. As you said, people from the inside of the different utilities that will build these offshore wind parks has said it's not possible, but it has been part of a narrative, a political narrative, that we can build energy, offshore wind, without state subsidies. So, of course, the reaction was, it was just laughter nearly. It was just every Danish media, not even tabloid, but respected newspapers, just saying this is the biggest flop. This is the green lie. Like, we have waited for this. We have been filled with hope, and now it comes to show that it's not possible. And it also sparked a backlash from the people in the green lobby, saying like, oh, there's a lot of different causes to this. It's mostly China is the biggest competitor, that's why. That's the first thing that they would say to protect this. The second one is that from this tender there would be a 20% state ownership of these offshore wind parks, and they say, oh, that this causes just a lot of bureaucracy and just causes the whole project to get slower. But it's maybe the opposite, because 20% ownership also gives you 20% more security of the investment. So you should invest less in these projects, and having the state backed at least 20% would actually be quite a good thing for these projects. And the last thing is the inflation. seeing interest rate rocket through the roof for renewables and mainly offshore and solar, resulting in offshore not being economically viable. And I think that is the case, is that the interest rate for offshore wind has skyrocketed. It's about 10% right now. It's at the level that some of nuclear projects will get. And it will fall, of course, but it will never go back to the same level as it was before. And this is I wrote a long thread about this back in April, I think, that was called there needs to be a reality check ahead. Because at some point we reach a saturation of this lie being told again and again, that ordinary people in society will actually start to realize that this is a lie. And then you lose all trust of the people in building large energy infrastructure. So what the renewable energy lobby is starting to do all over Europe is getting people to lose faith in doing a green transition. So that's not only about renewables, that's also about building nuclear energy in the future. So they've had their opportunity, they've had their chance, and now they keep on going, being comical allies that with the bombs falling behind him and saying everything is fine, everything is fine. And that's where we're at right now. We are at a saturation point of bullshit in this debate. Okay. And what we need, and sorry to say, I'm not political in this kind of sense, but I don't see it as anything surprising that we're seeing this right-leaning turn in politics and parties all over Europe, because they've had their sweet spot about calling out all the bullshit, in particularly energy politics. We've seen it in Sweden. We're now seeing it in Denmark. We're seeing it in Norway. So we're seeing somebody taking the opportunity to actually call out the bullshit of building that much renewables. So that's where I see nuclear energy will have a large impact in Denmark, especially because it's not about nuclear specifically. It's about being realistic. It's about saying, you've had your chance, renewables. You didn't show up to the party, and the cake that you showed up with was not even baked. We all got sick from it because it was raw eggs. Now we need somebody to cook and bake a perfect cake. It might take a little bit longer to bake it, but it will not make us sick in the end. A quite analogy for the energy system right now, but I think there's a very, very big reality check coming 2025, not only in Denmark, but all across Northern Europe. And we have seen that with the latest IEA report today about the path for nuclear, seeing a very, very, very positive signal also across Europe of building nuclear energy.
Yeah, the IEA report today finally expressed something that I've been saying for the past 2 years, which is we need at a very regulations streamlined. They have to be the same regulations for all the reactors of the same type that we build in every country. We cannot have 7,000 changes like they did for the EPR that they built in the UK, and then they blame it on the nuclear industry after forcing 7,000 change for a design that was approved in France and Finland already. We cannot have that anymore, and we need to lower interest rates because nuclear is not as expensive as borrowing the money to build nuclear is expensive.
Exactly, and just to build upon that, it's just what
the agency was says exactly these two things: streamlining regulation and lowering interest rates will be the key points to go big on nuclear.
And the fact that you're talking about interest rate is also for your listeners, is that when you talk about interest rates, I sometimes make the analogy of saying you could take I don't think you have it in Italy, maybe you do, but in Denmark back in the days you had like an SMS loan that you could write a number for a bank and get a quick loan with very high interest rate, but everyone could get it. And we all know that financing anything with having a quick loan with a high interest rate is a bad idea. But having a low rate loan that you also get dependent on for 30 years is a much better idea. And also going from a 4% interest rate on a loan to an 8% interest rate, that doesn't raise your overall cost with 4 percentage points, it raises it with a lot more than 4
Yeah, of course.
percentage
I guess.
points. And that's very, very important to tell people this, because if you 8%, 4%, what does it matter? It's not that big of a change. Yes, it is. It's a very big change, and very upfront, costly infrastructural projects that takes longer to build with no profit in the first 8 years. It has a tremendous effect in a negative way if it is a higher loan. And what the IEA report is showing is that nuclear, either SMRs or large conventional reactors with a 4% VHCC, so a weighted average cost of capital, or in normal terms, an interest rate, is as competitive on a LCOE basis as solar plus 8 hours of storage. And then we are not talking about system costs and all the other externalities, negative externalities of solar with grid improvements and also backup and balancing. But even on an LCOE, you would see that nuclear is as competitive as solar with batteries. And now when that becomes broader knowledge, I think some reality checks will be dealt out through the coming
Well,
year.
it's not topic for today, but I've already written sometimes that we need to change also the investors. I think, like, if banks are in quicker return, if some, like, if pension funds, I don't know if they're, I think, in Denmark,
Yes,
pension funds,
a lot.
they expect they return in 30-35 years. So they are the ideal investors for nuclear projects, because that's when they return, the returns show up, right? Rather than I don't know, bank or speculative funds that want a quick return investment. Then of course they want higher interest rates to make up for the fact that the return is not quick enough.
But just to add on that, to add on that with pension funds, it's very good that you say it, because in Denmark we have most of the green transition and building energy projects is funded by pension funds in Denmark. And what we've seen the last year is that several big Danish pension funds has lost a lot of billions Danish kroners, but so maybe in the high end of hundreds of millions of euros in investing in battery production facilities in northern Sweden. Danish pension funds had lost a lot of money on that because they became bankrupt, the Northvolt project in northern Sweden. And also you had a company in Denmark, a solar utility company called Better Energy, that made large solar farms in Denmark. And they have just went into reconstruction, and that ends up being bankruptcy for them. And then pension funds has been very clearly saying, like, okay, we burned our fingers on this. So we are not going to invest anything more as a larger amount of money in the green transition the next years, because the investments that we have made didn't turn out.
Yeah, so, and there is a news on this. I mean, not specific about Denmark, but I'm trying to prepare an article with a financial analyst expert about ETF performances in 2024. And while the energy sector ETFs generally performed very well, the renewables did not. And actually, the solar ones were the worst performers, while uranium tied ETFs performed very well, up to plus 40% in a year. So I think, and then it's already the second year in a row that renewable ETFs are going down, even if the actual market is growing, the investments are growing, but the ETFs are going down, which means that the investors are forecasting that something I mean, I don't know if it's a bubble bursting or it's just, I don't know, a small deflation, but I think that the craziness about renewables is starting to slow down. At least I think that we will have a more rational approach to renewables in the upcoming years. Maybe.
As you said, like the nuclear ETFs has a larger amount of capital captured in them than the renewable ETFs on a global scale. But of course, it's also hard to measure ETFs, because that's also a lot of private stockholders that invest in these kind of ETFs, and a lot of the money invested is not only It's not only on ETFs; it's directly into projects. So there is. It's not the perfect measure, but it makes a good image of how the market is actually turning out.
Okay, so let's move on to the energy island issue. You spoke about the fact that those energy islands were supposed to be financed by the money of this offshore winds project, and now that the wind project didn't go forward, or maybe it will. Maybe they will do another tender. I don't know. The island project itself is jeopardized, and that was a project also counting on, if I recall correctly, right?
Can you say the question again? Repeat it because you just the connection.
Oh, sorry. I think that the Energy Island project was something that Germany was also counting on.
Yes, the Energy Island projects was actually the new energy minister in Energy Commission in Europe, Dan Jørgensen from Denmark, that has been appointed, very anti-nuclear, trying to get out of that hurdle right now, but he's not doing that well. But he was the one proposing these energy islands back in the day. It made tech talks and all of that, and this should be also a market-based investment with no state funding. But it ended out being the energy island, the first energy island, needed 50 billion Danish crowns to invest, and that's around 8 billion euros from state subsidies, direct state support to these islands. And this was also counting on Germany having a stake in it. Sorry, not Germany, Belgium to start with. But then the Belgian Prime Minister pulled out, and now the Danish government has postponed these energy islands, everything with any final investment decision for 3 years at least, in talks with Germany. And my best guess on this is that these energy islands will never be built. It's just fairy tale islands from Peter Pan. It's not. It will never, never, ever happen, because it doesn't make any sense. It's just building an artificial island out in sea to produce hydrogen. And as we have talked about, hydrogen is a bubble. So the energy islands is just a branding tool for Denmark being innovative and putting themselves on the global map. But it'll not going to happen. The amount of state subsidies is too high, and the Danish public knows that. So everyone in Denmark at this point thinks energy island is just a scam.
Okay, well, I love that you use the word scam, because that was my impression, but I didn't want to I didn't want to dare using that term.
One of the most respected consultancies in Denmark called this a economical catastrophe in slow motion. So even from the top respected consultancies in Denmark saying that this is an economical disaster in slow motion, it says everything about it.
Yeah, pretty much. So previously you spoke about the fact that nuclear is regaining momentum in Denmark. Denmark has been in the past years. They have been one of the most anti-nuclear countries in Europe. You voted against nuclear in the taxonomy, and I mean the nuclear no thanks logo was actually born in Denmark, I believe. You told me this a while ago, and now the public opinion is shifting, and so Denmark is one of the very few nuclear countries in the world where nuclear is actually illegal. There is like a moratorium in place on building nuclear. In Italy, it's not technically legal, but you cannot build it because there is no laws that allows you, that there is no licensing framework to build it, so you can't, because the law does not allow it. But it's not made illegal specifically, while in Denmark things can change on this, right?
Just repeat the last part. It just lagged again. Sorry.
Sorry, my connection is terrible, but I swear I'm working to change it. It's also saying for the public. Connection is good, but I have to feed. It's fed from downstairs, and there is some packet loss. So things are changing now. I mean, this moratorium on nuclear, they're talking about it.
So just to sum up what the ban on nuclear in Denmark is all about is that we had a parliamentary decision back in 1985 saying that we should not include nuclear in Danish energy planning. That was the first thing. So this was not a law. This was just a parliamentary decision. But in 1999, this was implemented in the Electricity Supply Act, where it says that nuclear energy facilities cannot be built producing electricity. So by law, it's not possible to build a nuclear power plant producing electricity. You could build a reactor with a turbine, but at the second that you connect this turbine to a generator, it becomes illegal. And no one would ever build a nuclear power plant only for heat production at a big commercial scale. So the thing in Denmark, and also as for Italy, we don't have any administrative capabilities or any agencies or departments in Denmark that can oversee these things, and that's terrible because we are, as I said, we haven't had a plan back in the 80s and 70s to build nuclear in Denmark, and we had the professionals to actually regulate it and confirm it and give license to this. So we are not. We had once a administrative service of building nuclear power in Denmark, and it was laid off. And now 50 years later, it's returning, and some of the professionals from back then are still alive. And I've talked to a lot of these people, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking seeing these people that thought it was all over, and on their last days, maybe they have 10 years to live. They're in their 80s. Seeing this resurgence, it's tragic, but it's also seeing their eyes light up when you talk with them about a lot of young people. I'm not that young anymore. I'm 27, but
I'm
coming back to
just turned.
yeah, okay. But coming back to this discussion, fact-based, with a motive, with a dream of having a clean energy system with abundant, clean, reliable electricity for the future, for our kids and grandchildren. And it's remarkable talking to these people. And I think from what we're seeing is that the problem in Denmark, a lot of the time that we're talking about is it's about wind and solar. But the big green lie in Denmark, we could talk a little bit more about this. We also talked about last time, is biomass. Biomass is the big green Danish lie. It accounts for 1/3 of our whole energy consumption, not electricity consumption, but energy consumption, because all of our heat is produced with district heating in Denmark. 70 to 80% of all Danish household is connected to the district heating network. And this is produced with biomass on big, large combined heat and power plants around larger cities in Denmark. And all of this, most of this, over 50% of this is imported woody biomass from foreign countries, as Lithuania, Estonia, and also from the US. So there's a very big and compelling case for nuclear in Denmark because we have the infrastructure. We are a country built around having large energy producing facilities close to the cities, pumping out electricity and also 60-degree water into the household of the Danes. So building nuclear energy in Denmark close to cities at the already existing sites where you already have the district heating pipes, you have the electricity network, you have the transmission capacity, you have a harbor that you can ship it to. You don't need cooling towers because we have such a long shoreline. It's a very compelling case, and a lot more people are starting to recognize this. Not only advocates as myself that have advocated this for several years, but professional people, politicians, consultancies, banks, pension funds are realizing this, and we're working on a lot of things right now to get this through. So when the ban is lifted in Denmark, I think it will have a ripple effect because Denmark is the last bastion.
Okay, when will it happen?
This year.
You're sure about that?
I'm sure about it because I can't say too much, but from what I'm hearing and the people that I'm talking to in Parliament, there is only one party left to change, to flip. That's the Social Democrats. All of the blue parties, as we call them in Denmark, on the right side, are all in favor of lifting the ban. And we've just shown that the company now I'm working in, Stjernfuld Energi, Danish-Swedish company, we've just really we paid the most respected polling agency in Denmark, Megaphone it's called, to make a opinion poll, a population poll about the Danes' opinion about nuclear energy. And what we see there is a large majority, over 50% of Danes wanting to build nuclear energy in Denmark. There's for every person that says no to nuclear in Denmark, there's 2 people saying yes. And also this is in regard of building nuclear, but also lifting the ban. So we made the polling agency ask different questions. What we see is that 55% of the Danish public would vote yes in a referendum tomorrow to build nuclear power plants in Denmark, and only 27% would vote no, and the 18 to 90% is don't know what to vote. So if there was a referendum, there would be built nuclear energy in Denmark.
Okay,
And also,
that's actually a very great news. Polling in Italy has been actually going on for a couple of years now about nuclear, but it's not very consistent because you get very much different results depending on how you frame the questions. There have been a poll from the Greens, and of course, like 3 out of 4 people turned out to be against because of how they phrased it, and then basically everyone who said I don't know, they counted it as a no. So
but for Denmark, the framing of the question is objective. We don't ask any framing for it. Would you build nuclear to solve climate change, or would you build nuclear to get rid of Putin's gas, or anything like that? It's just a question saying, would you like to build nuclear in Denmark? Not any framing. It's just an objective question, and there we see a large majority voting yes, an absolute majority in all questions. And also we asked about NIMBYism, and that's a very interesting polling results that we will release next week from the company of mine that I'm working in, is that actually if you ask people, would you like a new smaller nuclear power plant in your municipality? So the NIMBY question, 53% of Danes says they are either very positive or positive about getting a nuclear reactor in their municipality, and only 25% says very negative or negative. So building nuclear power plants will have a majority, lifting the ban there is a majority, and also getting nuclear power plants in your municipality there's a majority.
But the last question was only asked for smaller reactors, that's correct?
Yes, it's because for Denmark it will only be small reactors, and that's
probably
realistic.
A large one would be too much.
It will be, it from grid constraints. So in Denmark, we have grid constraints of adding 700 megawatts to the system of disturbance in grid fallout. So you cannot build a larger unit than 700 megawatts. You'll be lifting this in Denmark actually to 1,000 megawatts. But it's harder to sell a larger nuclear project in Denmark because the consumption of the offtake is not there. Sweden it is, because they have a large industry. Finland it is.
Can't you just like, rather than building your own nuclear, can't you just chip in the Swedish new nuclear builds, because they've announced new builds for like several gigawatts of power? Can't you just chip in and help financing their power plants and buy from them?
You need to know about Danish and Swedish history. Like Denmark and Sweden were the 2 countries being at war for the longest time in world history. Denmark and Danish people and Swedes has a love-hate relationship, and I don't think, like Denmark, the Danish citizen were the ones getting Barsebäck closed back in the 19th and closed in 2001. That was the Danish people's. It was the Danish government that pressured the Swedish government to close a well-working nuclear power plant on the other side of, because there's a very small barrier between Malmö in Sweden, where Barsebäck was located, and Copenhagen. It's like 30 kilometers from there. So the Danish population thought it would be a danger. So I don't think the Swedes will ever go agree with a deal to make nuclear power plants with Denmark. That will never happen. It's a great idea, but it will never happen, like for political and historical reasons.
Okay, and there was a question. First of all, I have one of my team members, like people from my team, that is an expert on energy markets, and he worked for a Danish wind farm company before moving to Switzerland. And I didn't know he would be watching the lives today, but because he was, I invited him to tell us, like, to join the stream to tell us his insight on the wind energy market, offshore wind energy market, and how it will evolve in the upcoming years. So there was this question, yeah. What does Norway think about the Danish demand to store Danish energy in their hydroelectric reservoirs?
It's a very good question and very relevant question, because you
Because
will actually.
I'm adding some context for the public. A couple of months ago, there was a day prices in Germany skyrocketed, like they went to crazy level. We are talking 900 euros for a megawatt, which means in the balancing market they could have been even higher. And of course the price was exactly the same in Germany and Denmark, because like it's the small country that's the closest one, so the like contagion effect is the first one. And then you can see in Sweden and Norway you also get this contagion effect, but because those are divided in zones, you see the contagion effect diminishing the farther you go from Germany. And the Norwegian and Swedish energy minister were pissed the fuck off. Like they were absolutely mad. Norway threatened to literally cut the cables that sell energy to Germany, and Sweden said, if you don't divide Germany in different price zones, we will not build you a new cable to buy energy from us. Like they were very, very mad. And Denmark, well, they didn't say anything, but they were also caught in the crossfire. That day prices were very high in Denmark as well. So with Norway, I'm gonna just, while you talk, I'm gonna just show the price screen because I have the image, the screenshot.
As you said, it's totally correct, and thank you for a very easy to understand lesson on electricity markets. I think it's also something that I work with daily, so it's nice to hear people as you being as good as telling about how electricity markets is actually made, and having different zones and countries. And it's totally correct what you're saying, is that you had Danish, German energy prices and Danish energy prices affecting southern Norway and southern Sweden. And
So
what you saw,
this is the daily average, and this is the like maximum demand hour. You have 900 euros on the spot market, and the same, it's right the same in Denmark. And then you
exactly.
see Norway and Sweden, and then the farther you go from Germany, the price start to go down.
And the thing is that I don't think that Germany will be split on in different zones, because that will make a very big problem for Germany specifically, because you have industry and production in not directly the same place. So you will have very low prices in some areas of Germany and very high prices in other areas. And that will only make them even higher in the bidding zones if you split them up. So I don't think that Germany, like this, is hurting all of Europe having one big German electricity zone, market zone, because as seeing as a small country as Denmark has 2 zones, Norway has 5 zones, actually 6 zones, Sweden have 4 zones. And what we're seeing in Denmark, we have a lot of interconnections. In Denmark, we have over 120% of our consumption could be covered by interconnectors, and that's the only way that the Danish integration of renewable energy is seen as such a high percentage of our electricity, that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we are able to import capacity from abroad. But the question, of course, with us storing electricity in hydro reservoirs in Norway, just to get one thing straight, and I think this is a very important thing, is that when people say that Denmark stores electricity in Norwegian hydro dams, it's a truth with modifications, because that sounds like we are sending electricity to Norway and then they pump water up in a reservoir as like pump storage. That's not what's happening. It's just that they turn off their hydro production when they get electricity from Denmark. But the argument is that, it's so good for Norway because then they get cheap wind energy from Denmark. But if you look at a merit order curve, and just to explain what that is, it is a graph showing the marginal price of production of an energy source, and seeing that renewables is the cheapest ones to produce with because there's a low marginal cost. Then comes hydro, then comes nuclear, then comes coal, gas, and biomass, and so on. So the difference between just producing electricity with hydro in Norway and the price that you could get from importing from Denmark is not that huge. So the whole narrative of Denmark supplying green, cheap electricity to Norway, they already have green, cheap electricity. They don't need our wind. They don't need it. So, and also for Sweden, the problem with Sweden is that they have enough electricity production to meet their consumption, but it's the transmission from the northern part of Sweden to the southern part of Sweden that's the problem. So it's not about building more production. It's also that because they need more, because they will electrify more. But as of now, building like transmissions lines down Sweden would be the best way of synchronizing the Swedish grid, and of course cutting the cable to Denmark. So it's more advanced than you would think of. It's not just synchronizing grids. It's also about the amount of electricity capacity being exported and imported inside the country.
I didn't know that there was like this. I didn't even know this narrative existed. Like the narrative of Denmark selling cheap wind energy to Norway. This, like, I mean, it's true. Like the wind energy is actually generally cheaper than hydro, and it's even true that sometimes you literally pay Norway to buy electricity because you can have negative prices on the market. But the point is that when wind is not blowing, you are actually increasing demand because you now want to import from Norway, and when the demand is so high, the price skyrockets. So when you are selling them energy at a low price, sure, they're maybe saving some euros, but then when you buy from them, because the demand is so high, because it's not just Denmark, it's Germany as well, which is a very big buyer, like demand is so high that like Norwegian bills have been I don't know, tenfold since 2022, and the Norwegians are not happy about that. Also, Norway also sells to UK. There is like a big cable from Norway to Scotland, an underwater electricity cable. So when the wind is not blowing in Europe, everyone is desperately holding onto Norway and France, and that increases their electricity prices because of higher demand. It's like literally the demand supply law. It's like the economy 101.
And the people getting the profit of these sales, because of course if you produce hydro in Norway as well, when there's a high demand and no wind, there's a very, very small marginal cost of producing hydro, and the distance of the marginal cost of producing hydro to the actual price on the market being set by gas turbines, all of that profit goes into these companies that are owned by the Norwegian municipalities and the Norwegian state. So it's just a hidden tax for the Norwegians to. They already pay enough in taxes, and also with energy prices they pay a lot more because of the integration of energy systems in the northern Europe.
Sorry, I was trying to send a link to my friend to enter the live because he's not reading WhatsApp. So I'm gonna just message him on Instagram. So you think that the nuclear ban will be lifted this year? Do you think that this will result into an immediate push for new nuclear builds? Or will it be like in Italy, that okay, now let's do a feasibility study and may take 5 years? Because Italy is progressing towards nuclear, but it's like very slow because the government doesn't get any chance with polling. Basically, they are too afraid of losing voters, so they are like going very, very slow. Like we do a small step and see what happens in the polls, and then we do another small step, and basically they won't do anything until the next elections in 2027. Will it be the case in Denmark as well, or will push you towards an immediate, don't know, tender for new builds within a couple of years?
I think, of course, we need to have a regulatory commission being set in place for having nuclear in Denmark, and it depends on politics, as you say. And I think if the parties that actually are pro-nuclear in Denmark that could gather a majority, if they went into a coalition, that will likely happen in the next election, you would see a big leap in this being implemented. And also what you're saying to the start with having a streamlined regulation across Europe and a certification process. Sweden now is modernizing its whole certification and regulatory agencies and rulings on building new nuclear. So if Denmark in a year changes their opinion from a political perspective, we could latch on to the Swedish government. Maybe we'll not build nuclear power plants together, but we could buy or get some of their experience and regulations in advance, because we have a Nordic cooperation between these countries. So I think it depends if there's political push, and that is what I'm working with, straight up. Like my raison d'être in this is getting politicians to understand this and the public, and electricity price analysis and so on, but this needs to come from a political side now. The technical hurdles of nuclear energy is not the problem. It is the technical hurdles, it's the political hurdles in countries. And I think Denmark, with what we're seeing in the latest opinion polls, will make a great leap and maybe surprise a lot of people in building nuclear in the future. But of course, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to happen in 5 years. We will have a 10 to 15 years span from getting the political decisions to getting the reasonable agencies put in place, and also getting the contracts to build and building up a workforce, building the nuclear power plants and connecting them to the grid. But 10 to 15 years is not that of a long time of the return that you will get from.
It's definitely doable. I want to welcome Andrea Fasullo. Andrea has been a long-standing member of my team, basically covering the financial aspects of energy. He has a degree in energy engineering with a focus on markets, if I recall correct.
Yes. I studied at DTU, Johan. Probably you know the.
I know the Danish Technical University.
Yeah, and you actually after graduating, you worked for a big wind energy Danish companies. Is that Vestas or a...
No, it's Ørsted.
Ørsted.
Okay, so please tell us your insight on the. We're writing some news in the chat.
Sorry, Luca. About what? Because you faded a bit.
Of course, the offshore wind energy market. We were writing some comments in the chat about some companies that have been losing money.
Yeah. So actually, I was commenting in general the Danish market, the Danish economy, because there was this developer, Better Energy, where I interviewed before joining Ørsted, that suddenly went bankrupt, and also Novo Nordisk, which is this big pharma company, was producing the weight loss drug that basically made his stock really grow a lot in the past years. That suddenly also fell by 40% because of tests going bad, basically. So I was a bit worried about the future of Denmark because of this renewable energy bubble suddenly bursting, and also on the other side, this big company on the pharma side that is reducing its value, basically, to these the forecast on its basically major investments in this weight loss drug that also didn't come as expected. But apart from that, I think Johan, you have been covering the old Danish market quite well. I can't say much more about the Danish market compared to what you just said. And also, I'm happy to see that Luca is interacting with our Danish counterparts. Let's say, I studied in Denmark. I've been in Denmark for more than 4 years. I've been in Ørsted for more than 1 year. And actually there, my job was basically contributing to the bidding activities of the company for big offshore plants. I've been in Ørsted exactly when the market started to shrink. So when we had in Ørsted this big financial impairment, which was due to a US project not being constructed anymore because of logistics impairments, let's say, then the whole offshore wind market started to shrink as well with Vestas stocks, Ørsted stocks. And I think a lot of people started to realize that the expectations were a little bit higher than what reality was proposing them. So right now, what I can say on the offshore wind market, I think, so 3 things. When you build a new asset, you can have 3 major ways to get the revenue from the market. The first are CFDs. Second is the merchant, so just exposing the asset to the spot pricing. And the third is doing it through a PPA. So on the first part, CFD. So CFDs now are, and always have been, really a lot, the direction has been put by governments. So there is a political agenda, there is a political willingness, there is an idea, let's say, a political commitment to a certain technology or industry that's gonna basically incentivize the competition on a certain amount of volumes or capacity. So that's the first thing you can do. And that thing can help reaching the financing issue of the developers. Although that is politically driven, and therefore there's going to be political commitment, and basically the action that's going to be taken is only based on the political side, so on the political standpoint. Second thing is merchant. The merchant side is a little bit more complicated. Why? Because if you're a developer and you want to build a new asset, then you're going to say your lenders, so people who's going to borrow you money, that you wanna, or either you pay with your own money, and usually developer or small medium-sized developer don't do that, or you pay, or you get the money from the lenders. And if you say the lenders, hey, I want to build a new offshore wind asset and I'm gonna expose it to the spot prices, then the lender is gonna be really not that willing to pay you. And the reason is that these spot prices are really, really affected by big offshore wind projects. The same reason why the PV panels are depressing prices is the same reason why the offshore wind industry also is challenged on the merchant side. Because when you build a big project and the wind is blowing, suddenly there is a lot of volumes generating, and there is a lot of volume in the grid, and therefore the prices are gonna be depressed. If prices are depressed, you don't profit a lot. The last 2 months, November and December in Northern Europe, have seen a lot of negative prices. I have been looking at Polish prices, and for whole November and December, because of high wind yields, there were a lot of negative prices. That is not liked by the lenders. So the assets in the merchant scenario are not going to be incentivized, I think, in the short, medium term. Then there is the third option. So going to get the lenders to agree to your assets through a PPA. And few days ago, there was this developers is called CIP, Copenhagen Infrastructure Investments, Copenhagen Infrastructure Partner, sorry. And they basically reached this fat deal with Google for 250 megawatts of offshore wind capacity. And probably if I had to put my money somewhere in offshore, I would rather put it on the PPA side compared to the other ones. Because on the PPA side, we start to see big industrials like Google, like whatever industry that uses data centers, that is very hungry for volumes and is very hungry for different profiles. So if you're a developer and you only build solar, then you're gonna ask yourself, okay, how can I serve these big industries in a way that they are gonna be willing to pay me a better price? And a way to do that is to offer a more stable profile. So there is these hybrid solutions that can come into play. Solar plus wind, solar plus onshore, solar plus offshore, solar plus storage plus offshore. And I think the way to see the offshore wind market right now, or the wind market in general, is going to be more and more through these agreements, through PPAs. And also it is what I'm personally more prone to believe in, because at the end there is a market demand, there is a real demand behind, and the market is left to make its choices. So there is some allocation of resources that's happening automatically on that side. So that's my
Johan, you to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add on it, because very interesting taking Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners up. It's a big investment fund in Denmark that invests in do a lot of procurement when it comes to building offshore in also in Asia as well, and in Taiwan. I somehow agree with you that PPAs is the most promising way of this industry going with offshore, but it doesn't solve any problems, as we know, because it's not that you connect a offshore wind park to the data center. So it's just being fed into the grid. So the externalities of integrating offshore in the system will still be there. And when it comes to nuclear, there's also difference, because when Google says they want to build SMRs powering their data centers, they're talking about doing SMRs close to their data centers for the place where they're building it. So if you finance do a procurement deal and you have as Copenhagen Infrastructure did with Google, it's not because that data center in particular will be built in connection with that data center, that offshore wind park. So there's still a lot of constraints in this market, because data centers will add so much constraint or consumption to that particular area that they're built, that it will not be the PPAs that finally account for them being built. It's being built in areas where there is spare capacity as of now, or there will be built spare stable capacity in the future, because you can buy a PPA for an offshore wind park for a data center, but the data center will be powered by the closest energy source in that area. And if there's no stable generation in that area, the data center will not be built. And I think that's the biggest problem in Nordic countries, because as of now we don't have the firm capacity to power these data centers. And a lot of these places where these data centers is being put forward, they don't have the spare capacity to do this. So we need to build close by firm capacity for these data centers. And then it's a great deal to doing a PPA, because it's directly powered to the data center, of course. But I think the PPA thing is maybe the last nail in the coffin for a lot of the offshore industry, because it doesn't solve the problem of getting the power to the data center in the end.
Also, I think that when the wind is blowing, the price market is so low that why would a buyer strike a PPA? Like, why should I buy energy from you at a fixed price when you can sell me energy only when the wind is blowing, and when the wind is blowing, the price is actually close to zero or even negative? This is what I wonder about. I'm not saying it can't happen. Right now there is so much hunger for data centers. Like, there is like everything, there is always like I'm not saying a bubble, but yeah, a sort of bubble. Right now, data centers are the next big thing, and everyone wants to build them, and everyone is like looking, yeah, well, maybe we build one here and one there and one there. But eventually, the ones that will be able to secure a stable energy supply with low prices will be the ones that will be built, and the others, maybe they will be scrapped eventually. I'm not saying what you said, Andrea, won't happen. I'm saying it probably will happen, but I'm not sure that the scale will be as big as to salvage the offshore wind energy industry.
No, that absolutely no. I mean, I think it's quite clear by now that the expectations for offshore wind should be revised. So that for sure. If I were a developer, I was saying and if I had to put my money, to invest my money and put a bet on when and where those assets would be built in the short, medium term, then instead on the merchant side, I would rather put my money on the PPA side. And the reason for that is that a lot of industries, can be data center, can be big industrial producing ceramics or whatever, chemicals. Those most of the times are interested in additionality, meaning that they just, like, for them, a big source of their reputation and of market attraction on the stock market is that they are claimed to be green. So they receive these GOs and they contribute to financing these renewable energy assets or green energy assets, so that the banks are more prone to put the money on and decrease the cost of capital. So if I had to be opportunistic on the offshore wind market, I would put it on the PPA side instead of the merchant side, because of course that exposes the plants to more risk due to spot prices being depressed. And at the same time, developers that can do offshore wind are not that many, because if you want suddenly to start building offshore, then the cost of starting that are huge compared to onshore wind or compared to PV or compared to storage and so on and so forth. So not only you have a big capital investment, but you also need to benefit from the economies of scales of building big projects, because otherwise you can't build up a whole team in operations, in logistics, of technicians if you just want to build small offshore wind parks. It's not convenient. You need to monetize that with economies of scale. So you have few developers that do that. When they do, they want to build these big, huge projects, and those are going to be even more prone to depressing prices. Then there is the CFD option. The CFD option, as I said, is politically driven. And I don't know how much politicians are going to be willing to take the risk of losing votes, putting more and more offshore wind turbines in front of their voters.
The CFD has been recently approved as the go subsidizing energy. Any energy, actually, even nuclear will be subsidized with CFDs. So,
I think, and to that point, Luca, is I think also in Denmark, I think that the promise of having no state subsidies for offshore wind in Denmark will be held accountant in 2025. And what I'm hearing as well in Danish Parliament is there's a lot of discussion of returning CFDs to the Danish offshore bids. Because this is about, again, the narrative. It's about the political narrative, and there is a breaking point. There is a point where, as of now, the Danish government will still profit of the narrative of building offshore, being the country of developing wind and so on. But at some point, there will be a saturation in the population that are so much against just wasting state subsidies on this, that this will change. And there I agree with Andrea that PPAs will come into account. But at that time, I think a lot of other solutions, as more future-proof solution and longer solution as nuclear, would be more favorable, because what you're needing in a society, what we're talking about here, it's just about building electricity. And coming back to the question, can our society and our grids and our production actually handle the amount of integration and electrification in the coming years? And I think that will have a much larger focus in the debates, because nuclear is expensive. We can all agree on this. But compared to what? Because when it comes down to, if you only have one solution that can actually solve a lot of these problems, it actually doesn't matter how much it costs. So as we see with batteries being integrated in Europe, and I think this is also a bubble in some sense because of geopolitical questions about China and the amount of batteries that we're importing from China and solar panels and so on, with the rising political problems with Europe and the West and China, we will be left with only a very small amount of solutions. And what we're good at is offshore wind. It destabilizes the grid. and the next thing that we can do is nuclear. So I agree, in the short term and medium term, PPAs will work for offshore, but on the long run, I think the offshore market will become very, very small in the world. We're still riding on the euphoria of the idea of producing energy from the wind and not being reliant on big nuclear power plants and so on. But the whole discourse of the discussion has changed from being this fairy tale sunshine and lollipops narrative to be geopolitical, getting security of supply, geopolitical questions. As we've seen in Sweden, they just turned down 38 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity in the Eastern Baltic Sea because of military threats from Russia. And these problems, and also with interconnectors and so on in Estlink 2 between Lithuania and Finland being cut over by Chinese ship, and fiber optics being cut over, I think realism will come back into this discussion in the next coming years. And for me, not, of course, I'm biased, I'm a nuclear advocate, but I don't see any other option at this point from a realistic standpoint.
I would like to ask you a question, Johan, unless Andre has something to add.
No, I also would like to ask a question to you guys. So just shove your look, and then I'll.
Okay, my question is very simple. When is the next elections in Denmark, and who do you think is gonna win? Who's supposed to win, and how is that gonna affect the public debate on energy, specifically on nuclear energy? And because also, I mean, I've seen you criticize a lot the Danish energy commissioner in Europe, Jorgensen, I believe.
Dan Jorgensen, yeah.
Dan Jorgensen,
That was
yeah.
my question.
Okay, so of course he's coming from the Green, I believe, or the Social Democratic Party.
Social Democrats.
Yeah. Social Democrats, and so of course the party has a big stance, a big anti-nuclear stance, but Jorgensen himself have been, since he is in the European seat, he kind of milded, I mean, at least publicly, he didn't, he said we shouldn't grant nuclear the same subsidies, as the same conditions as renewables, but at the same time, we should also make sure that countries who want to use nuclear to decarbonize are able to do so. So it's kind of, I mean, I think it's not, I mean, I don't think he changed. I think he's kind of forced to swallow a hard pill that he doesn't like, but he has to, because there are other commissioners that won't let him get away with being totally anti-nuclear, including the Dutch one, the French one, the French energy minister, who is like very, very ballsy on nuclear and already showed so. So yeah. First of all, when are the next elections, and who's going to win, and how that's going to change? And then a word on Jorgensen.
The next election, parliamentary election in Denmark, is in 2026. And there's a lot of rumors about this being actually in 2025 because of the municipality election that will be in 2025 in Denmark. We have elections for municipalities as well. And in these elections, the polling is looking very, very bad for the Social Democrats, and maybe there's an argument that Mette Frederiksen will publish an election before in 2026 when it's mandatory, because to try to drive up the municipality election, because a lot of the mayors in the Danish cities, larger cities, are Social Democrats, and they are losing out in votes. So there's a big political dilemma there for the Social Democrats. But keeping to the mandatory elections, then it's 2026 for the parliamentary election and late 2025 for the municipality. And either or, if there's a parliamentary election today, I think the right-leaning parties will win. If there's a municipality election in late this year, a lot of the right-wing parties, and saying right-wing is weird because I have a hard time translating the Danish bloc political spectrum to just European politics, because all parties in Denmark is left leaning compared to all other countries nearly.
Yeah.
So
Not
So,
all.
so,
I
so
mean,
no,
when you
not
say
all.
right wing, right now people think AfD or Marine Le Pen. So you have to
No,
be.
no. So we have some parties that are very right leaning, but most of the parties are moderate or left leaning. So in the municipality election, there will be more moderate parties getting into mayor positions and getting larger amounts of votes. And in the next parliamentary decision, there will also be as a hard pill to swallow, as you said about Jørgensen, but also about the Social Democrats. So I think the next parliament, the next government in Denmark will not be led by the Social Democrats. It will be led by the more moderate parties, as Venstre. It's called it's weird. It's called the Left Party, but it's right leaning, and maybe the Conservative Party. But concerning Jørgensen, I have a long history with Dan Jørgensen. I have debated with him a lot of times, talked with him a lot of times, having a lot of opt-ins in updates in newspapers and debates with him. Dan Jørgensen, he is anti-nuclear. You'll never change that. It's by bread and butter. Like, he was born with anti-nuclearism, and he will die with anti-nuclearism. What he's doing in Europe now is swallowing a very large camel or a hard to swallow pill, and trying to keep his integrity of being a technology neutral energy commissioner, which is stated in his mission letter by Ursula von der Leyen. What he's doing with nuclear in the European Union right now is just, you can see right through it, in my opinion. He's saying as you said, look at one time he's saying, like, we need to invest in renewables, but nuclear projects will not get money, but countries that will build them, they can build them if they really want to do it, but will not help them. So they have to do this without the European Investment Bank or anything, and I think this might change through the next years, but this will be a very hard time for the Energy Commission in the next 5 years. He will not change drastically on this question. He's doubling down on this, and he's trying to make that argument that I'm not anti-nuclear, and then comes all the negative sides, and he will keep doing that for the next couple of years.
We all know that everything that comes before the bite is false, right? There is
exactly.
German proverb. Alles
Exactly.
is verloren ist.
But Andrea, was that the same question that you had to ask me?
Yes, I actually had the same question. What was, guys, your view about this new European Commissioner about energy? That was Dan Jørgensen.
Dan Jørgensen.
Just about that, and then maybe expand the question to more international, into a more international context with the new presidency of Trump, like conservatives taking over politics in general in the West, because that also could affect the agenda on the energy system side. We have seen that. I think like it's going to be curious to see how the thing is going to be developed, if they're going to change everything and opt for more fossil fuels as America seems to be prone to do, or the other way around, they will just say that we'll change everything or everything's going to stay the same.
Someone was asking in the chat if you are ready to go to war with the United States over Greenland.
I think the whole Greenland debate is blown out of proportions. Like, Denmark has no say in selling Greenland. It's Greenland in the constitution, or not in the constitution, by law in Denmark, has the possibility of getting sovereignty if they want to vote for it, and then they can make their own decisions. And Denmark has nothing to say. Like, the Danish Greenland history, Denmark has done so much colonialism and bad things to Greenland the last 100 years that Denmark is the last country to come out here and say that we want to do good things for Greenland. So people in Greenland are not fond with the Danish history and the Danish government. Denmark has given them a lot of money, but that has always also put Denmark on the global map as having this big icy island in the Arctics. But just resuming back to Dan Jørgensen, the only way that he will change his opinion is that if the Social Democrats in Denmark change, and I think they will do. So he will get the mandate from them. He's commissioners are not self-sovereign. Like, they are still in their position. They are being controlled by their mother party back home, because they're representing the interests of the country either if we like it or not. Politics is not objective, and there's biases, and there's a lot of incentive to do great for the country that you're representing. And if the Danish Social Democrats change on this, then Jørgensen will as well. And then the question comes, how will this change come? Because they need an opening. So when I'm talking to Social Democrats, I'm not calling them stupid or trying to make them look at their own shit. I'm just trying to give them a helping hand and saying, if you come out pro-nuclear, no one will stand here and call you bad things and talk about your past in any way. They need to feel that it is safe for them to come out pro-nuclear. And that's what we're showing in our latest opinion polls, that there's actually more Social Democrats voters being pro-nuclear than against. So even their voters are changing, and politics sometimes move very slowly. But with these paradigm shifts that are happening now, and as conservatives are taking over politics, I think the Social Democrats are closer than we actually think to changing their opinion on this. And I'm doing the best that I can in Denmark, and being an advocate and also being an advisor for several politicians, and trying to help them understand that this should not be polarized about nuclear versus wind or solar. This should be a gathering of trying to solve climate change and mitigate climate change. And some people try to make it a polarized debate about being either or, but in the end, we have the same goal, and we have maybe different measures, different tools to reach this goal. And I think that's the best way maybe to end this discussion off, because I also have to go to bed. I have to go to work tomorrow, of course.
Okay, sure.
It's just to say that in the Danish perspective, what we're trying to do is to make a more realistic and nuanced energy debate. And sometimes you have to kick some doors in, and you have to point at the elephant in the room, but also you have to be strategic about it. You don't have to make as many enemies that you can't have people on your own side. And I think the Social Democrats will come out supporting this in the end. They just need a good story. And I'm trying to think of a good story to give them, to how they can come out of the closet in some sense, how they can turn on this, and how they can present this to the public without being butchered, turning on this. And there's a lot of thinking and a lot of idea making and a lot of ideas being scrapped, but we're doing the best that we can. And I have a lot of faith for Denmark in 2025. Yeah.
Okay, I'm very happy that you are closing in on a positive note. Unfortunately, in Italy, it's not the same, at least when it comes to the left. I don't have a lot of dialogue with them. They don't reach out. I tried to reach out, but with no results. Seem to be stuck on their anti-nuclear narrative. Also, I don't necessarily believe that we want the same thing. And this, unfortunately, speaking about the Italian left, because they certainly do want to decarbonize, but at the same time, the Italian left has been caught in the degrowth loop. And so, sure, we may be wanting to decarbonize, but I want prosperity and growth, and ultimately. And unfortunately, I think this is also why the right is prevailing. Conservatives are prevailing in a lot of countries, because the left failed to deliver prosperity. People are very happy to give rights to immigrants or homosexuals or everyone, as long as their belly is full. If you fail to deliver prosperity, then everyone will turn against the minorities. And this is what happened in Germany. This is why AfD is growing so much. And this is what happened in other countries as well. So I am a little bit more worried than you are, but I'm happy that at least from Denmark, the good news are coming. But yeah,
we're a small country, but with a big impact. So if we can do the best to make the last bastion, as I call Denmark and Germany in this discussion, Denmark has such a large impact politically and diplomatically on the question about decarbonization. So if Denmark can fall, it maybe send ripple effects all the way down to Italy. And
I really hope that it does. I really hope that it does.
And then you can use this case against them and say, even the Danish are going nuclear. What the fuck are you talking about?
I definitely will. As soon as you leave the ban, you will see me slamming that on face of the Greens. And okay, I want to thank you, Johan, for these very precious insights on the Danish situation. I want to thank you, Andrea, for the additional insight. I would like to remind everyone that next week the live will be on Wednesday, the 22nd at 6 p.m. and we will as our guest. For Johan, he's economist and the founder of a new political formation that is still not a party, but it's libertarian kind of politician. And I wanna wish everyone a very good night. And grazie Johan, grazie Andrea.
Bye bye. Thank you so much for being on.